You have been standing in that garden center every single spring picking out plants that look absolutely stunning in the container they came in, bringing them home, dropping them into your pots, and watching them slowly collapse by August. And then you tell yourself you forgot to water, or you watered too much, or you used the wrong fertilizer, or you simply do not have the instinct for keeping things alive. Let me stop you right there because I want to be direct with you. It is not your fault. The plants you have been choosing are the wrong plants. Not because you made a careless decision. Wrong because nobody at that garden center ever sat you down and explained the fundamental difference between a plant that was developed to look appealing on a retail shelf and a plant that was actually built by nature to handle confinement, heat, drought, and neglect in a container with minimal involvement from you. Those are two entirely different categories of plant, and the nursery industry has no financial incentive whatsoever to teach you that distinction. Because the moment you stop coming back every spring to replace what died, you stop spending money. That is not cynicism. That is just how retail operates. Today, I am going to walk you through 9 perennials that are specifically suited to life in a pot. Not plants that can survive in a container with the right amount of babysitting, but plants that genuinely outperform in containers compared to what they do in the ground. Plants that reward being left alone. Plants that return year after year without you touching them. And I am going to tell you about one plant on this list that most gardeners have never considered for containers, and it produces so much continuous color through summer and fall with absolutely zero deadheading that once you grow it, you will wonder why you ever spent money on annuals at all. We will get there. Do not skip ahead. Before we go any further, I need you to do one thing right now. Drop your US state or your Hosta hardiness zone in the comments below this video. Just your state, just your zone, whatever you know. It tells me exactly where this community is growing, and it helps me build content that is genuinely specific to your conditions, not broad generic advice. Actual region-specific plant recommendations that mean something for your climate and your yard. Drop that zone in the comments while it is on your mind, and then let us get into this. The first plant I want to talk about is Coreopsis, tick seed. And if you have tried it once in a garden border and had mixed results, I understand why. But here is what most people do not realize. Coreopsis in a container behaves like a completely different plant than Coreopsis in the ground. And the reason for that comes directly down to drainage and soil control. In a garden bed, this plant is competing with tree roots, moisture fluctuation, compaction, and weed pressure. In a pot, you control every single one of those variables. And because Coreopsis evolved across the open prairies and meadows of North America, it was shaped by thin soil, blazing summer heat, and extended dry periods. That is almost exactly what a well-drained container replicates. The variety I recommend most for containers is Coreopsis moonbeam. Soft, pale yellow flowers that bloom in continuous waves from June through September without stopping. It stays at around 18 inches tall, which is ideal for the front or mid-level position in a larger container, and the fine thread-like foliage gives it an airy, delicate texture that makes it pair beautifully with bolder plants. Here is what matters practically. Do not deadhead it obsessively. Let the plant cycle through its own blooms naturally. Moonbeam is a self-cleaning variety, meaning the spent flowers drop away cleanly without leaving behind an ugly brown mass that you have to pick through. That self-cleaning habit is not an accident. It is a trait that was deliberately selected for over years of breeding, and for the container gardener who wants continuous color without continuous labor, it changes everything. Hardy in zones 4 through 9. Water it well at planting. Let the soil dry out thoroughly between waterings after establishment, and then step back. Neglect here is not a mistake. Neglect is the technique. The second plant on this list is one that serious container gardeners have been quietly growing for years while the big box stores keep pushing the same tired annuals on everyone else. Penstemon, beard tongue. And I want to be specific here because there are hundreds of Penstemon species, and the one that matters for containers is Penstemon digitalis husker, red. The foliage alone makes this plant worth growing. It emerges in spring as a deep, rich burgundy red that holds its color through the entire growing season in full sun. The tubular white flowers appear on tall, stiff spikes in late spring and early summer and attract hummingbirds and native bees with a consistency that will surprise you the first season you grow it. But here is the critical thing to understand about Penstemon in a container. This plant does not just tolerate a pot. It performs better in a pot than in the ground in most American garden climates. The reason is exactly the same as it is for every drought-adapted perennial on this list. Drainage. Penstemon developed in open, rocky, well-draining habitats across central and eastern North America. It has a genuine intolerance for saturated winter roots. In a heavy garden bed that holds moisture through autumn and winter, that is often what kills it. In a container with proper drainage holes and a well-structured mix, you remove that problem entirely. Hardy in zones 3 through 8. Full sun to light shade. Go easy on the fertilizer. Too much nitrogen pushes soft, floppy growth that ruins the plant's naturally upright architecture, and the architecture is half the reason you are growing it. I want to take a moment here because if you have watched this far, you are not a casual gardener. Casual gardeners click on a video, watch a minute, and move on. You are here because you are done wasting time and money, and you want information that actually applies to a real yard with a real budget. That is exactly who this channel exists for. If you are in your 50s or 60s or beyond, and you have spent too many springs replacing plants that did not have to die, subscribe to this channel right now. It is free. It is here every single week, and every video is built specifically around plants and techniques that reward the gardener who wants genuine results without becoming a full-time laborer in their own backyard. Hit that subscribe button, and then let us keep going because the next plant on this list is one I have been growing for over 2 decades without a single failure. Catmint, Nepeta Walker's Low, and before you say anything, I know the name is misleading. Walker's Low does not stay low. It mounds up to about 2 feet tall and spreads beautifully over the edges of a large container, which is precisely what makes it so valuable in a pot. The flowers are lavender blue, produced in dense cascading spikes, and they begin in late spring and continue through early summer in an absolute explosion of color and fragrance that draws bumblebees by the dozens. And then here is where it earns its place on a lazy gardener's list. When that first flush fades, cut the whole plant back by about half. Not a careful selective deadheading. Just take a pair of shears and cut it. 10 minutes, done. Within 3 to 4 weeks, Walker's Low will have rebounded with a full second flush of blooms that carries you all the way through to frost. That single cut is the only active maintenance this plant requires all season. Everything else it handles on its own. The fragrance of the foliage is deeply repellent to aphids and whiteflies, which means you are getting built-in pest deterrents from a plant that also happens to be one of the most beautiful things you can put in a container. Hardy in zones 4 through 8. Full sun, minimal water once established. This is the plant you put in a container on a hot, south-facing patio where other plants surrender by July and you watch it thrive. Plant number 4 is the one I mentioned at the top of this video. The one that will change how you think about continuous color in containers. And it does it from late spring all the way through hard frost without asking you to remove a single spent flower. Geranium rozanne. Now if you think of geraniums and picture the red annual pelargoniums in window boxes, put that image aside entirely. This is a true perennial hardy cranesbill geranium, and is in a completely different category. The flowers are violet blue with a white center, luminous and clear, and they appear from late spring in a continuous, uninterrupted wave that does not pause through summer the way most perennials do. It does not take a break, it does not require deadheading to keep going, it simply blooms. Week after week after week until the first hard frost shuts it down. The reason rozanne blooms without stopping is something I want you to understand because it explains exactly why this plant demands so little from you. Rozanne is a sterile hybrid. It cannot produce viable seed. Every time a flower fades, the plant has no biological pathway to redirect energy towards seed development. That energy stays in the plant and goes directly back into producing more flowers. It is a loop that never closes, and it runs entirely without your involvement. The trailing stems reach 18 to 24 inches over the course of a season, and as they spill over the rim of a container, they create exactly the kind of soft, overflowing edge that elevates a container planting from ordinary to something people stop and look at. Hardy in zones 5 through 8. Pair it with something upright in the center of a large pot and let rozanne do what it does naturally. You will not need to touch it again until you cut it back in late autumn. Now let me talk about a plant that has enormous practical value in a specific situation that frustrates almost every container gardener eventually. That situation is shade, deep shade. The north-facing porch, the covered deck, the corner that gets 2 hours of indirect light on a good day. Most perennials give up in those conditions. This one was made for them, Hosta halcyon. Now, if you already grow hostas in the ground, you know they are durable. But what you may not know is that hostas in containers solve one of the most persistent problems with growing them in garden beds. Slugs. When you grow a hosta in the ground, slugs find it, and they will reduce those broad, beautiful leaves to something resembling Swiss cheese before July is over. When you place a hosta in a container, even slightly elevated off the ground, slug access drops dramatically. You have removed the primary pest problem without a single chemical input, simply by changing where the plant grows. Halcyon is specifically ideal for containers because of its size and its extraordinary foliage color. The leaves are a cool, smooth blue-gray with a surface texture that looks almost frosted in morning light. That blue-gray tone in a shaded corner acts as a natural brightener, reflecting ambient light back into the space and making the area feel larger and more intentional. Medium-sized, clean, self-maintaining. Hardy in zones 3 through 8. One container of halcyon placed in a shaded spot will return for 20 or 30 years with almost nothing asked of it. I want to stop here for a moment because there is something I think about when I work on content for this channel. Your local garden center employs people who know what looks attractive on a display table. They are not horticulturists. Their job is to move product. The content you find on most gardening platforms is produced by people who are compensated by the brands selling you fertilizer, pesticide, and replacement plant stock every season. Nobody who profits from your plants dying is going to tell you how to stop replacing them. This channel is different. Nothing on this list was chosen because anyone paid me to include it. Every plant here earned its place through years of consistent performance in real containers in real American yards. If that is the information you want every week, subscribe right now. It costs you nothing, and it will save you real money every single season going forward. The sixth plant on this list is one that adds something almost no other perennial can provide in a container. Vertical structure. Stiff, self-supporting vertical structure that holds through wind, heat, and an entire season without staking, without collapsing, without needing anything from you. Rudbeckia goldsturm, black-eyed Susan. This plant is one of the most reliably performing perennials in American horticulture, and it is still massively underused in containers because people associate it exclusively with roadside plantings and meadow gardens. That is a mistake. In a large container in full sun, Rudbeckia goldsturm is one of the most impactful plants you can grow. The flowers are bold golden yellow with a dark, nearly black central cone, and they emerge in midsummer exactly when most spring perennials have finished and the container needs something to carry the season forward. They bloom for 6 to 8 weeks without pause, and here is the part that matters for low-maintenance gardening. After the flowers fade, leave the seed heads. Those dark cones standing above the faded foliage are architectural interest through autumn and winter, and goldfinches will strip them clean through December and January. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, which covers virtually the entire continental United States. Full sun, average water, no fertilizer required beyond a light compost top dressing in spring. This plant does not need your attention. It needs your trust. Plant 7 is one that I have enormous personal respect for because it performs in a part of the season that most container gardens completely abandon, late summer and autumn. When July and August heat has burned through the energy of your spring performers and you are left looking at containers that have gone dull and tired, this plant is just getting started. Sedum autumn joy, a succulent perennial that stores water in its thick, fleshy leaves and stems, which alone tells you everything you need to know about its relationship to drought and to container growing. It does not need frequent watering, it does not need rich soil. What it needs is sun, decent drainage, and to be left alone. In spring, tight broccoli-like buds push up that are architecturally interesting before a single flower has opened. Through summer, the plant mounds cleanly and holds its structure without flopping, which matters enormously in a container that gets afternoon wind. Then in late summer, the flat flower heads open to a warm, dusty pink. By mid-autumn, they deepen to a rich brick red. And when winter comes, those dried heads turn a coppery bronze and hold their form through ice and snow, giving you genuine visual interest in your containers through the coldest months when everything else has disappeared. 4 seasons of performance from a plant you basically never have to touch, hardy in zones 3 through 9. Now, before we get to the final 2 plants on this list, I want to talk to you about something that most container gardening content completely ignores: the soil inside your containers. Because the single most common reason that tough, drought-tolerant perennials fail in pots, plants that should be nearly indestructible, is the potting mix they are planted into. And this is a problem that the garden industry created and continues to profit from. Most commercial potting mixes sold in large bags at big box stores are formulated for annuals and vegetables. They are heavy with peat, they retain moisture aggressively, and over the course of a season or 2, they compact and break down into something that drains poorly and holds water at the root zone in a way that actively promotes root rot in perennials like lavender, catmint, and penstemon. And then you lose the plant, and then you buy another one. And the cycle repeats endlessly. Here is a better approach. If you are mixing your own container medium, and I strongly encourage you to do this at least once so you understand what you are working with, the formula I trust for most perennial containers is this: 1 part coconut coir or peat moss, 1 part perlite, and 2 parts finished compost. The perlite is the critical ingredient because it creates permanent air pockets in the mix that water moves through rather than collecting in. For the drought-adapted perennials on this list, the lavenders and catmints and sedums, I lean the formula heavier on perlite. Close to half the mix by volume. I want water moving out of that container quickly after a rain or after I water. If you prefer a mix with more body and structure, combine 1/3 compost, 1/3 sterilized topsoil, and 1/3 coarse sand or perlite. That gives you excellent drainage with enough weight to anchor larger perennials through winter wind. And here is where the real savings accumulate over time. You do not need to throw that potting mix away at the end of every season. That is an expensive habit that most gardeners never question. Old potting soil has lost structure and nutrients, but the base material is still perfectly usable. At the end of the season, remove any dead annual material, inspect the old soil, and scrape off any whitish crust on the surface. That is mineral salt buildup from fertilizer and tap water, and if it accumulates, it will damage roots over time. Remove between 10 and 30% of the old compacted surface soil from each container. Replace that volume with a mix of 1 part fresh compost to 5 parts of your existing old soil, combined with a small amount of slow-release organic fertilizer. That refreshes nutrients and reintroduces microbial life without the cost of replacing the entire mix every spring. For containers that have overwintering perennials still in them, your Echinacea, your Sedum, your Hosta, use top dressing instead of disturbing the root system at all. In early spring, before growth pushes hard, carefully scrape away the top 2 to 4 inches of old surface soil without digging deep enough to contact roots. Replace that layer with finished compost, a small addition of worm castings, and a light sprinkling of slow-release fertilizer. The worm castings matter here because they reintroduce the beneficial microbial populations that process organic matter and make nutrients available to roots. You are rebuilding the biological engine of your container without touching a single root. Applied consistently every spring, this technique alone will extend the productive life of your perennial containers by years. One more thing before we close out the plant list: pest control, because most gardeners are reaching for chemical solutions that are doing more harm than they realize. The good news is that nearly every plant on today's list produces aromatic compounds that naturally repel common pests. Catmint, lavender, and salvia all produce volatile oils that aphids and whiteflies find deeply hostile. But when problems do appear, and occasionally they will, the solutions are almost all in your kitchen already. 4 teaspoons of cold-pressed neem oil in a gallon of water, shaken well, handles aphids, spider mites, and whiteflies without harming bees or beneficial insects when applied in the evening after pollinators have gone home. For powdery mildew on your Hosta or Hutra in a humid climate, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/3 of a cup of cooking oil, and 1 cup of water applied as a foliar spray is genuinely effective and costs pennies. For soft-bodied insects like mealybugs, 1 tablespoon of dish soap per quart of water sprayed directly on the insects disrupts their outer membrane and kills them on contact. You do not need a $25 bottle of synthetic pesticide. The solution is already under your kitchen sink. The 8th plant on this list is one that I consider essential for any container setup, and it has earned that position through decades of performance that I have watched with my own eyes: Daylily Stella d'Oro. If you garden in America and you want a bulletproof container perennial that provides ongoing color without ongoing effort, this is the plant. Stella d'Oro was bred specifically as a compact, reblooming daylily, and those 2 qualities make it ideally suited to container life in a way that standard large daylilies simply are not. The root system is manageable and contained. The foliage stays at around 12 inches, which means it does not overwhelm smaller containers. And the golden yellow blooms come in waves that continue throughout the entire growing season, rather than in a single flush that lasts a few weeks and disappears. One flush blooms and fades. You remove the scapes by cutting them at the base, and within a few weeks another wave of buds is opening. That pattern of continuous rebloom will outlast nearly every other flowering perennial in your containers through the heat of a full American summer. This plant handles poor soil, handles drought, handles outright neglect in a way that would end most other perennials. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. Water it consistently for the first season while it establishes, and after that treat it the way you treat Coreopsis. Let the soil go dry, water deeply, let it go dry again. Do not coddle it. And the final plant on today's list is one that solves a problem I hear about constantly from container gardeners: the problem of late-season color. By September, most container gardens look exhausted. The spring performers are finished. The summer bloomers are winding down. And you are left with containers that are technically still alive, but not contributing anything to the space visually. Echinacea magnus, purple coneflower, is the answer to that problem in a way that almost nothing else matches. This plant blooms from midsummer well into September, which means it is providing color precisely when your container garden needs it most. The wide, horizontally held petals make the blooms look fuller and bolder than standard coneflower varieties, and the stiff stems hold upright through wind without staking. After the flowers fade, do not remove the seed heads. Those spiky brown cones are architectural structure through autumn and winter, standing above the dormant container, with a form that is genuinely beautiful against frost. And they are for food source. American goldfinches and housefinches will work those seed heads all the way through January. If you have ever had birds visiting a container on your porch or patio, you already know what that does for how the space feels and how the season ends. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. Water it well when you plant it, let the soil dry thoroughly between waterings after establishment, and then leave it completely alone. Neglect is the correct technique. Let me close with something I want you to actually hear. How much money have you spent at the garden center over the last 3 springs? Not just this past spring. Think back 3 years honestly. Add up the flats of annuals, the replacement perennials that died over winter, the bags of potting soil, the fertilizer, the spray bottles. For most American homeowners who garden with any regularity, that number is somewhere between $500 and $1,500 over 3 years, and a significant portion of that was spent replacing things that should never have died in the first place. That is not gardening. That is a subscription service you never agreed to. The plants in today's video break that cycle. One purchase, one pot, returns for years. Requires almost nothing. That is the philosophy this channel is built on. If you found value in what we covered today, subscribe right now. It is free, it is here every week. And next week I am going to show you exactly how to combine these plants together in specific container arrangements that provide color and interest from April through November without asking you to do much of anything between those months. If you are not subscribed, there is a real chance that video simply does not reach you. And before you go, one more time, drop your state or your Hosta hardiness zone in the comments below. Just your state, just your zone. I read those comments. I use that data to decide what comes next. And I want to build a real picture of exactly where this community is growing across America. 9 plants. Coreopsis moonbeam that cleans itself and blooms all summer. Penstemon husker red that drains beautifully in a pot and deters pests with its own biology. Catmint walker's low that rebounds from a single haircut and blooms until frost. Geranium rozanne that never stops flowering because it biologically cannot. Hosta halcyon that brightens the darkest corner of your patio for decades. Rudbeckia goldsturm that carries your containers through midsummer when everything else is fading. Sedum autumn joy that gives you something worth looking at through February. Daylily stella de oro that blooms and blooms and blooms without stopping. And Echinacea magnus that finishes the season with structure and color and feeds the birds through winter. These are the plants that belong in your containers. Not because I said so, because decades of consistent performance across American yards in every climate and every zone have proven it. Go fill some pots.